everyone. My name is Bronson. I am the director of content at Orto, but I will be behind the scenes moderating the chat, kind of moderating that Q&A. So if you have questions, feel free to pop those in. But my main goal right now is to introduce Daryl and Christy Gilhoy. They are our speakers today for today's webinar. And Daryl has a ton of experience, and he's the former president and CEO of Advent Health in Central Florida and a national leader in health system transformation. And he has a lot of great experience to be able to share today. And Christy Gilhoy is a member of Awardco's Center of Excellence, and she is a seasoned employee experience executive with a passion for building people-first cultures that are rooted in data and strategy and heart. So we're really excited to have both of them on our webinar today. And Daryl, we'll toss it to you to take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really nice to be with everyone and to share a bit of my knowledge and experience. And it's especially good to have Christy here with us today to add some real talent and expertise. Most of mine, Christy, is built on failure and personal struggle. And so yours will be very, very important to this conversation. But it's really nice to see everybody here. And please do engage and ask questions. We love that and look forward to that. I wanted to get started with a question for you. And I'd really like you to think about your organization and keep this in the context of your organization, because that'll be really useful. A lot of times I think we we see rewards and recognition and employee programs as a solution that can somehow veto a larger problem set. And often it struggles to do so because the design of an organization and the culture of an organization can defeat even some of the best programs. And I want to talk about that a bit today. So, getting straight at it, here's a question. What behaviors get rewarded the most at your organization? If you look at celebratory emails, award points, various types of bonus materials, what is getting rewarded? Is it the right list of things? Is it what you want to be rewarding? Is it healthy? Are they healthy behaviors or are they unhealthy behaviors? And does your organization know the difference? Now, my context is healthcare. The healthcare context is very interesting because in healthcare, there is this superhuman dynamic. Uh, Things are rewarded like, um, man, she's always on. You can send her an email at midnight. She's there, amazing. Yeah, Bob's in at 5 every day. He's awesome. He could be incredibly inefficient, but he's in at 5 and he gets honored in healthcare because the culture of expertise and the culture of striving and the culture of superhuman activity in healthcare is very, very, very profound. Um, the challenge there is that there's this flywheel effect or this circular impact of rewarding what we value, and then that becomes the value system of the organization, because what we reward becomes the value system. And people are highly tuned to that, more than what gets me an annual bonus. What gets me honored, recognized, promoted, growth opportunities are the things I index off of when I think of uh, a career choice. It's interesting. So, Christy, I'd
Daryl,
love to pull you in here. Yeah,
totally.
I have.
I'm a contrarian. I was thinking what doesn't get recognized are sometimes those unsung heroes, the people on the night shift,
Ooh.
the people on the night shift who people don't see, those very quiet one-on-one interactions. I'm from tech, but I think about my interactions with healthcare, whether it's skilled nursing or hospice or a one-on-one appointment where someone, dealt with me and something I was really afraid of. So I think I'm totally that recursive thought, like the big splashy,
Mm.
extroverted, public, performative things get recognized a lot. But when I think about diving deep into either healthcare or a very healthy culture, you also want to draw out those very quiet moments, personal moments, and the unseen moments, right?
Oh, so true. And it starts to really change the organization when you shine some light on those more quiet, really effective people. I remember in one leadership role, um, I created the expectation for leaders at a director level and above. We created a rotational dynamic we called night rounding. And we would actually, each of us was expected, including me as the CEO, we were each expected to work a night shift, meaning we would work full office hours all night long. And then the next day we would be off and rest. And we would, someone director level and above would be there every night. So we would rotate once every quarter or a little bit more. And during that night shift, we were expected to round on all of those in the organization for a couple of hours as well, and to go recognize them, tell them thank you, make sure we had some specific feedback for them. It was amazing. At first, Christy, the night shift is accustomed to not having leadership around, and it was almost annoying for them, I think, to have us in the building. And there were some suspicions that maybe we were there to keep an eye on them. But after a while, after they were able to see the tone of it, it really became positive because it brought the night shift onto the team in a sense, in a way that that was really special.
I love that so much. And I love that you flipped it, right? Instead of people feeling like they're being watched, you flipped it to catching people doing something good, or catching people when they are in that more autonomous role without leadership, probably making difficult decisions, judgment
Yeah.
calls. They probably have a great sense of humor if they're working in the night shift, right? There's probably a whole culture of the night shift that then the
There is.
director and above were able to plug into, right? And to
Yeah.
appreciate, and then, like you said, communicate maybe to the day folks or to the leadership. I love that. Not only for healthcare, but any kind of workers who may be deskless or away from, an office situation. I do love that.
Right. Yeah, and you find bad things too, right? So it's important. It's important leadership practice because you see things that maybe culture slips in the organization, and it's an interesting thing to try to keep the rounding positive and figuring out how to deal with those slips, not always in the moment, so that you're not the police force, but you're making note, and then eventually making some changes that improve the organization. So there's a lot of good that comes from these kinds of disciplined activities. So back to this rewarding what you want culturally. And part of my personal experience, I'm going to get very personal for a moment, because I entered healthcare. And my background is probably relevant here. So if you want to meet some of the most carefully uh, orchestrated people out there, make sure that they have some religion in their background and some healthcare in their background, because there's this mask wearing expectation, right? You got to show up well. This is probably true in other industries, so I'm not leaving them out. I just haven't worked in all industries. But there is this dynamic of invulnerability that is admired and reflected in echoes and reward and recognition programs, and the way people get promoted and the way people get viewed. So I have the ability to mask a lot of things. I can show up well, I can communicate well, I can appear very confident, and show up as the style of leader with the right hairdo and all that. Meanwhile, I can be struggling internally. And starting in college, I had my first panic attack in college. I had a really traumatic experience, and a few weeks later, I thought I was dying, and ran out of the building I was in to the lawn outside. My girlfriend followed me out there and said, "What's going on?" I said, "I don't know. I don't know. I'm, I might be sick. I might be dying. I might be losing my mind. I don't know." That led me to um, realizing I needed help. It's not just a panic attack. I call it the anxiety blanket. It just changes your entire view of life when it comes down. So I went in for the first time, I got therapy. I was very embarrassed about it. It was a deep, dark secret. I did not want my friends to know. I didn't want anyone to know that I was getting therapy and that I needed medication. Fortunately, I did get therapy, and fortunately, I did get medication. When I came out of that particular phase, which, by the way, for those of you who've not experienced it, can be many, many months of struggle. No one saw it. I pulled it off. I kept my school working. I made it all happen, and I felt great. Okay, survived, moved on, moved to graduate school, got into my career, and started to grow rapidly, and felt fine. Had my first CEO job. Typical person in their late 20s gets an opportunity to be the CEO of a small hospital, do cool work. You'd never say, I'm not ready, right? I'm ready. Put me in, coach. I'm ready to go. Got this great job. And all of a sudden, and I knew what it was at this point: panic attack, the anxiety blanket, the struggle. And I had this huge responsibility, and I had this huge challenge because this was a challenged organization. What other kind of organization would you give a 20 something person to go run? So very tough job. And of course, I had to hide it now, right? Because I'm a leader, and I could lose my job if someone knows that I'm struggling. And all the rewards and all the recognition are for these superhuman kinds of activities. So really hit it again. I actually went 2 counties over for therapy. I paid cash for medication, keep it off the benefits. This is how afraid I was. Now I'm telling you my story not because it's unique, but because it's common. It's very common. People in your organization are doing this today. They're very fearful of talking about these things. And I'll tell you why I know that. So I continued the facade and this invulnerability and this courageous leadership. No one knew I was able to get into work every day, do good work, and continue to perform. Not everyone can. My experience was unique for me. I was able to, and that was certainly helpful. As I went through that personal experience, I was terrified. I was terrified people would find out. When I came through it, I was relieved and thought, okay, here I go again. I'm in good shape. Now, I'm going to tell you the end of the story in a little bit, but I want to leave it hanging there for a bit. Here I am. I faked it. I got through. Um, I didn't get discovered. Now, Christy, let me ask you this first. If you knew about my struggle in the middle of it, and you were my boss or a peer in an organization, what do you think the probability is that you might put an asterisk after my name?
I think it just becomes a data point that I'm thinking about, right? It's part of
Yeah,
my picture of Daryl. I know things about Daryl, and that's just one data point. I think it has to do with who I am, my generation. Have I gone through this? There's a lot of context in there, right? But I
right.
definitely think it's a data point that I'm carrying with me. Um,
And
moving.
that, I love how you put that. It's a data point. And that actually is part of the fear profile when you think about a team, because it is a data point. And Christy, you might use it very well. It may be a point of admiration for you. It may be a point of recognition that here's a real human being, and I'm glad I know they're a real human being. For another person, it could be a reason that you'd be worried about promoting me, or a reason you might be worried about putting me in a position that might have a high stress level. So that data point becomes a fear factor. And I'd ask the audience to think about this. Like, if you think about your organization, what is the likelihood that if someone in your organization is struggling, that they talk about it? What is the likelihood that a leader would be open, despite the fact it becomes a data point? And it certainly does. Becomes part of your reputation, part of who you are. It's interesting, Christy, because it is who you are, but somehow there's this fear, this shame associated with that part of who you are coming out, and this carefully crafted organizational dynamic becomes interesting. But I'm curious if the audience has a sense for whether that would be rewarded in your organization. um, People would be honored for telling the story. They'd be respected. They might get opportunities because they're trusted to be authentic and open about who they are versus hiding. Or would it be a data point that could hold people back and create fear in your organization? Christiana, what is your sense of that? As you work with organizations, do you think the probability is that the fear is overhyped, that most organizations would be very mature and would admire and reward this behavior, or that there might be some cultural dynamics where that fear is somewhat legitimate as we think about how we grow our workforce?
I think I think it's changing a bit. You know, we were talking
Mm,
generational
yeah.
pieces before this, and I think people who came up like me as Gen Xers were very loath to show any of that. And you said healthcare and religion, but also, you know, I have a lot of friends in the military, same kind of thing, sort of being impenetrable. And then you have global cultural pieces.
Mm,
But I will say that kind of like listening to your story and how you framed it and talking openly about that can bring great relief to other leaders, right? And at one of my tech companies, a very high-ranking engineer who came from India originally talked about his own mental health, depression struggles in to advance our employee assistance program, and
oh, amazing.
that very bold move, especially for that population. Not only was he high-level leader, but there was a lot of cultural issues around taking help, right, or trusting a system like an EAP. So I think there's something really magical about those leaders who can share that and get ahead of it and share it in a way that's proactive. But I think it's rare, right? I think to your point, the
Yeah.
data point, some people there's a stigma, there can be a stigma. But I think my daughter's generation, the newer generation, they're talking more about mental health, right? There's
Yeah.
more openness about that, and I think we're moving that way as a culture.
Yeah, it's actually that was the turning point for me. It was associated with my son. So there's definitely this generational reality. So I was asked to speak at an all-student assembly at his university. And I was asked because I'm a business leader and they wanted a business leader to come speak. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if I talked about this experience and what it felt like in the workplace and how I felt in college and some of the regrets I had around how I handled that. And I thought, of course, I'm going to ask Caleb because I don't want him to be embarrassed.
Yeah.
So I sat down with him and said, "Hey, I'm thinking of this talk at your university. I'm thinking of doing it on this topic, and what do you think? That I don't want to embarrass you." And he looked at me and said, "Why would I be embarrassed?" And oddly, I was emotional about that response. I thought, my whole life I've been embarrassed, and he just looks at me and says, "Why would I be embarrassed?" Um, so I did it. I got up there and I did a talk. And I was warned, by the way. They said, by the way, this is like a class period in the middle of the day, and when you're done, if you go over it all, people will just leave. And don't feel offended. They do that with every speaker. I finished, and students lined up down the center hallway. And I was there an hour after I was done, person after person after person, going into in law school, in business school, in medical school, people struggling. I'm terrified I won't be able to handle my industry. when I get out there, or that my progression will be really impaired by this. I'm terrified. How do you handle it? What do you do? So I left that, Christy, I left that, and I went back to my executive team in the very first meeting when I got back. And I said, let me tell you a story. And I told them my whole story. My goodness, that is the first time I got to know my executive team,
Yep.
really know my executive team. Now, not all, it wasn't like the whole room just opened up, but one at a time, executives came into my office and told me their story.
I love
These are also invulnerable people who I thought, well, they must not struggle, so this is vulnerable of me to share this story. The person struggling with depression came in, the person whose spouse died by suicide, and I had never heard the story from her and what she carried with her every day. So, this idea of what you reward and what you recognize, this is no lightweight topic for me. This is a life-changing, game-changing topic for me.
And I love
Sorry,
that
Chris.
I love that your son, I love learning. We learn from our kids, right? We don't expect
Oh,
it. But I
we
love
should.
that your son, yeah.
Yeah.
I love that your son opened that door, and then all the help that provided, not just to those students who had all those questions and that anxiety, but that experience then opened you up to your executive team. It's just this lovely cascade of opening up people's feelings that are maybe hidden or yeah, that are not being shared openly. I love that story.
Well, and I realized that when I tried to be perfect or appear perfect, I was creating distance between myself and the team. And when I became honest, that distance closed. And one of the most powerful things for an organization is to recognize that it's filled with real people and to keep that distance as narrow as possible. And I think that this reward and recognition program, its connection to culture and its connection to authenticity in an organization and the thoughtful design of what actually gets honored and what gets spoken of, because part of rewarding something in an organization is speaking of it in the way it's spoken of and allowing it to be in the air and in the ether. And part of it is tangibly recognizing it, calling it out, handing out a plaque or a bonus or an incentive. Um, it's interesting the links between recognition and speaking of things in an organization and the ability for people to thrive. 4 times more people report thriving in a workplace when there is this kind of reward culture and openness dynamic in the organization. Um, and I think Christy, I think it's a little bit sad when the only thing recognized is output,
Yep.
right? Productivity. Somebody wrote a report that's beautiful. That's good. That's product. That's work product. But how do you think about how people work and the characteristics of cultural representation and certain value system dynamics being rewarded and recognized in addition to output? Have you seen some wins there? Good examples that are relevant?
Yeah, I mean, and also, like you said, with the cultural pieces, we tend to call out, if we're a US based organization, we tend to really focus on the individual. And then as we think about our colleagues in East Asia, South Asia, there's places where recognizing the group effort and not calling out the individual
Mm,
might be more effective, right? And might be embarrassing or demotivating to call out someone in their peer group. I think the research is interesting on that performative piece of, calling out the end product work from the manager or leader. I think there's a place for that, but what we found in the research is that the peer-to-peer call out, it's kind of like you talking to your executive team. What the peer-to-peer call outs and recognition does is it may not increase performance, but it increases the well-being. It's like
Mm,
Daryl sees me, he knows what I'm going through, and he's still recognizing me, or Daryl showed up for me and was a listener. So I think that's a really interesting piece that showed up in our research. A lot of people are focusing on manager and leader recognizing their employees to drive performance. But in terms of well-being and mental health, it's are the people in my orbit, the security guard who sees me when I check in, the nurse that I work with every night, are those people seeing me in my work for
mm.
what makes me good at my job and what makes me help take care of the people that I need to take care of?
Wow, yeah, that's so true. And I think about the condition of our team. I think sometimes we don't have the pulse, right? And it's so important to have more eyes and more nerve endings in an organization. If it's just leadership nerve endings, that's that's pretty faulty, right? This the whole organization has to function in a powerful way. I remember really studying the workforce as we went through COVID in healthcare. Of course, COVID was this existential event for all of us. And in healthcare on the front lines, it was a very traumatic event. And as we studied the condition of the workforce during that time, I remember reading a Deloitte study from 2019, so before COVID was known. Um, and it was a study of 700 critical care nurses. So this is the group during COVID 2020, 2021, 2022 that it was on the front lines, seeing a death rate and a struggle that was incredibly high compared to their norms. And that's a tough environment all the time. And in this study, critical care nurses self-identified as being a 5 or lower out of 10 on mental health and a 6 or lower out of 10 on physical health more than half the time. So if you think about half of nurses or more than half of nurses having physical health and mental health struggles in 2019 and then heading into COVID. Now every industry is different, but you come back to this idea of the nerve endings. How much do we actually know about our workforce? And what organizational risk is being created when that struggle is silent, when it's unseen and unknown, and people are just powering through? In healthcare, it has substantial negative dynamics, which include criminal activities like stealing drugs out of secure drug cabinets or medical errors that can kill patients. In other industries, it has other error profiles that are also important to recognize. But to me, Christy, the reward and recognition programs and the way peer-to-peer interactions
Yes.
happen are a massive value creator and safety creator in an organization.
Yeah, it's really a net, and thinking about folks I've talked to in healthcare who went through COVID, and I go back to your initial question of what gets recognized, and I think we did an incredible job as a population of recognizing our critical care nurses and the frontlines folks. But as I talked to some folks in healthcare too, we may not have given the recognition to the cafeteria workers who also came in every day, to the janitorial workers who came in every day. Those
Yeah,
people supporting our
yeah,
nursing staff and our medical staff, they were there too. And I do think the peer-to-peer starts to call it out because a nurse can't do his or her job without this ecosystem, right? Who's in your little
right.
ecosystem? And it could be the person that just made you your lunch that day when you were exhausted. So like you said, it's like calling out and highlighting all of these little societies that are happening within a larger organization that leadership won't see. Even if you do the rounds at night, you're not going to be able to catch all of those nuances.
Right. And I think leadership culture really matters here too. I put my personal cell phone in the patient information guide in every hospital that I led. And in my last job, I had 23 hospitals and thousands of beds, and I put my personal cell phone in the guide that's in every patient room, and also made it available to all of our employees. And the I also sent from my personal email box a weekly update to, in my last job, 30,000 team members. And they could just hit reply and reply directly back to my email inbox. Um, Comms people like to package and polish things, right? And that terrified them, that I would go that directly. But for me, it was always important to have the nerve endings and direct feedback loops. And it's shocking how few people abuse that access. It is not abused. There is no reason to fear your employees. This is the team that makes the organization function, and they should be honored. And recognizing them is not just about formal HR style reward programs, but how they feel honored and how they feel access. But that practice, which just happened to be instinctive, it's amazing how often the least visible people got the kudos when I had more direct visibility.
Yep.
The frequency of notes from patients or phone calls from patients about an environmental services worker that changed the trajectory of their entire stay outpaced, I can say for sure, outpaced their comments on nursing or physician care. The probability of the person delivering food being a positive impact on someone's healing journey was very, very high. Um, and that would be easy to miss in the world of hierarchy, right? That many industries have. In the law, certainly, there's the attorney, there's striations among attorneys, then there's paralegals, and then there are non-legal staff, and so on. And healthcare, physicians, nurses, it's everyone has it. But the fact is, the more that can get broken down through these programs intentionally in organizations, I think it's interesting the way you put it. You create a safety net, something that creates a sense of uh, safety and knowledge that builds your culture and protects the organization against harm.
And let me flip the hierarchy too, Daryl, because I have stood up a recognition program. And we do it at our sort of manager HR
Yeah.
employee experience level. And the CEO may sort of have a general idea but not know about it. But the way one of my CEOs became aware of it is that he came on to an all hands and gave a very difficult talk once, and people recognized him. This idea of recognizing
Oh,
also
I love
up.
that. Yeah.
And he was like, wait, what is this? Why am I getting this feedback? And it was positive, like, hey, you really showed up. You were authentic. This is a scary time for us. And so we also encourage in that hierarchy, not just the nerve endings to the organization, but if you put your phone number in those books, like I would say that's super meaningful to me as a nurse, because I know that we can get a hold of you, and that makes me feel like you're not so far away, right? So I can recognize up my VP, my CEO, if I want more behaviors from them that are transparent or authentic, or if they share a story that feels a little vulnerable. So I like both ways, the nerve endings too. The people
Yeah.
who on every day, but also we need to recognize up to tell our leaders when they're leading us in a way that feels good and we feel supportive and can do our best work.
That's such a good call out. And a blind spot for me. And I think it's part of the way that some leaders become distant and brittle, because it's tough. It's tough. And there isn't a lot of recognition that flows upward, and there's a lot of you run your average town hall, the questions are tough. It's not full of gratitude often. I'm interested now for everyone to um, wake up. Hello. Okay. All right, you ready? I have a question for you, and feel free, if you're comfortable, to write this in the chat. I think it'd be interesting to see some of your thoughts flow through. um, take take 20 seconds. And Chrissy, if we can be quiet for 20 seconds on a webinar, that'll be interesting. But if you take 20 seconds and think of a behavior that your organization rewards that might actually hurt well-being. And think of the counterpoint, positive, a behavior you wish was rewarded more often because it supports well-being. Just think about that, and if you put those in, it would be interesting to see some of those come through. Okay, you can't say we distracted you during that gap. Um, I see taking on too much work. I think, Christy, I think that's a common one. The um, the not saying no, that person who will do everything, and so they get loaded on more and more and more. For sure, staying late versus taking more brain breaks. We need this work to get done. Uh, Sometimes you do have to work really hard, and you need people who are ready to lean in and do that work. Um, but how do you balance that? How do you balance this? You don't want people. You want people to have a long career with you. um, you don't want them to have a very short, struggling career with you. How do you think about that? How do you start changing that story?
Yeah, it's tricky. I love all of these comments in here, right? People not taking PTO. We just need to get this
Yeah.
done. I was thinking when you asked the question that we don't value transparency enough. You know, as a leader, I've
Mm,
always put on my calendar's open to my whole team, but I've put my kid pick up and drop off, or maybe I've put a walk on there. So if I do know I have a long day, like I want my team to see that I'm protecting my time so that they hopefully don't feel like they have to hide those things away. Um, so I think transparency is one we don't call out enough. And we do.
mm.
Like a lot of the comments in the chat are that performative, overworking, taking on more and more versus boundary setting or balance. I remember working with a company. We were doing a merger with a company, and our company that was merging with them, people never talked about that balance. And the company we were merging with, I remember hearing, especially the dads, which I hadn't heard, saying, "I've got to pick up my kids this afternoon. I can't make that meeting." And
Mm.
I had never heard that in a meeting, especially with dads. For some reason, it struck me. So
Yeah.
they obviously had a culture of being more open about this is my home time, and then I'll come back online after. But just that transparency, I think, is really healthy.
Yeah, I've heard what you're describing and what your practice referenced as permission giving, right? It creates this environment where people feel like it's okay to say, to Diana's point, I don't have the bandwidth right now. Um, I really will struggle to take this on. Or as simple as I'm taking the evening with my family. And there are more formal ways to do this too. I know some organizations have created built-in email policies, which was some of the big email providers actually will allow you to build organizational policies that send a reminder to text or call if it's an emergency, but your email will not be sent until the morning. And it actually holds back emails after a certain time in the evening to give people a break. Those are absolutely valuable ways to recognize the balance and reflect and kind of magnify the kind of culture and the type of organization that you want to create. And I think this paradigm shift is important in our industries because the stress load is getting higher. It's not just workload, but now it's change load, isn't it? Um, I was sitting with a large tech company, and they have formed a human factors team. I found this
I
fascinating.
love that. I love that.
And the human factors team's job is to figure out how people work with AI effectively in that organization. And as I was sitting with them, and I literally like, there's a whole team. focused on human factors and how AI and people work together. And as I've gone around and asked people, wow, do you have a human factors team? How are you thinking about AI and how it enters your organization? How thoughtful are you being? Exactly zero additional companies have had that. So I think there is this sense of, wow, how do we grab the AI opportunity and how do we take, automate certain things? How do we take cost out? But how are we thinking about the humans? How are we building to the future? And uh, Christy, I think the future could be very bright. The opportunity for us to have human beings, some of the stress and productivity load being relieved due to better tools. But what I see is more fear, not relief so far. And maybe you have some bright spots out there, but I thought that was really an interesting investment
I
by
love
that
that
organization.
human factors idea, and I come from a change management background, right? And so much change makes people freeze or flight, or they can't handle it. I just read this morning, Brene Brown said that Gen Z is missing on average 1 day a week, so 50 days a year. Right? The rapid change of AI and just everything that's happening is giving them that freeze kind of response. So being intentional, I love the intentionality of that human factors group to put some people's brains and might and a community around, how do we support the humans in this technological, rapidly changing world, I think is really important. Instead of just inviting the new technology without sort of thinking about the rigor and the human impact.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that really comes to shifting the paradigm. As we think about this question we started with of what is rewarded, what is recognized, what is the culture that's being amplified through that reward and recognition program, and this recent conversation around the good signals and the bad signals that might exist in an organization. I think that there's this signal to be thoughtful about how an organization is designed. One of the things that uh, I see often is people getting annoyed in some ways at their own workforce. It's kind of an interesting, it's an unfortunate leadership mentality. When a leader gets annoyed at a bunch of people who don't want to work hard or that don't, they're not functioning the way that they should. And and what you see if you really dig in, like if you get under the hood in those organizations, you see organizations with a faulty organizational design, often one that can be kind of inherently toxic, and it's invisible to leaders. They're not aware it's toxic. Um, I'll use a not healthcare industry, lawyers having to bill every 6 minutes, right? I mean, that's tough. That's tough. That has an inherent potential toxicity to it that has to be recognized. It has a reason for it and a history to it, but it could become a problem in organizational design. So often I see this segmentation. You have the way you run the organization, and then you have HR and their silly little programs. Too many leaders think this way, and I
Yep.
think it's very, very unfortunate. And that creates tacticians and it creates people without a strategic voice at the table in an organization. When the real problem in the organization is the design of that organization, the systems inherent to that organization, and what it emphasizes, and what it de-emphasizes, what it rewards, and what it punishes. So when we think about each of our organizations as we are here and we think about this problem, what if we had a voice at the table? How would we get the voice at the table? What are the moves an organization needs to make? These are rhetorical questions that every organization should be wrestling with. But the ability to redesign an organization for inherent thriving, inherent health, the inherent development of long term, joyful, purpose driven work. is something that has to be on the agenda of people leaders and on the agenda of well-being leaders and organizations. And to me, this ability to demand in an effective way, because there are ineffective ways that get shut down, the ability to demand that those conversations happen, the real ones happen, that we're not gimmicky, but we're being real here. Christy, in your experience, as you think of leaders in this space that you admire, and that idea of being at the table and being able to advocate, um, what are some characteristics you see that help people get to the table, and that and or the contra, you get dismissed, or you lose your effectiveness if you're not careful?
I smiled at HR silly programs because I've always been the person leading the HR silly programs, right? I've gone about it the other way in terms of, because even in the most toxic, unhealthy organization, there are probably some leaders who are doing it right, who have figured out their org, who aren't burning out their folks. So what I've always done is use the listening survey and the data and maybe taken 2 or 3 data points. Like, who says I would recommend my manager to others? Which team has a higher
Mm,
ESAT score? Who feels like they have work-life balance? Who maybe doesn't have as many sick days, right? And then figuring out who those leaders are in the organization who are getting it right, and then going to them and saying, hey, Daryl, I just saw you have all these scores that indicate that you have a healthy org. What's your secret sauce? And then not only getting that from you, but then cascading that out to the other leaders who may not have that and who may not know that they have a toxic org. So really bringing that positive peer pressure along, if you can't do a whole structure reorg, but really picking out those 5-10 leaders globally across divisions, across business units. So you have engine sales, and I'm coming from the tech world. But to start to pinpoint what is it about
mhm.
those folks, and you'll find that they support their people, that they recognize them often, that they allow for some balance, that they're in tune with their folks, right? So calling those out is just another way. Otherwise, it feels like a pretty big, daunting task to turn the whole super tanker around.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very true. Sarah, by the way, in the chat talks about Gen Z, and I'm interested if the approach starts to vary generationally, and what your observations are around effectiveness. Does one approach, I may be as a Gen X white male talking about things that might be highly irrelevant to someone from a different background or a different generation. How do you stay current on that? At home, it's impossible. I'm just an idiot, right? I just don't know the current trends, and in leadership, that's a risk. So I'm curious how organizations can effectively deal with this, especially around culture and reward.
Yeah, I've had to really re-examine this because the data we've done through some of our research at AwardCo is not that there's a different need for Gen Z, but to Sarah's point, that they're bold and confident about saying the quiet part out loud. I mean, we started and you shared your experience, Daryl, and some struggles,
Mm,
and you were quiet about that. I think there's been Gen Z is much more willing to say, I'm struggling with mental health, or I need a balance, or work isn't my whole life, or this feels like a toxic environment. So we haven't seen in the research that people respond any differently. You know, we bootstrapping Gen Xers, we also need recognition. We just don't say we do because we grew up at a time where that just wasn't part of our work culture. Whereas Gen Z says, we need that and we need it weekly. And if you expect us to pivot and be workers who are dealing with this really changing economy, and all this new technology, we need feedback on the regular and in person, like, or not just electronic, but like real one-to-one feedback. So I think the needs are the same, the human needs, but I think Gen Z is just more in touch with it, and is demanding it. And if they don't get it, they will leave, right? So they're taking their workforce with them when they don't get that in a culture.
yeah. I think that's so um, it's so interesting to think about the longevity of an organization and its success. Every organization struggles with this possibility that it starts to struggle or fail over time. And a lot of that has to do with people and the ability to be relevant today for the team today and build strength for the future. I this conversation is really important to me, and I know it's important to everyone here. Bronson, I wonder if you came back in, and if you have thoughts or if there are questions. I know we have just a couple minutes left, but it would be great to deal with any hard questions that have come through on the chat or any additional thoughts that would be worth talking through here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Daryl and Christy, first off, for the wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it. And for all of your expertise. And we do have a couple of questions here I want to pose to both of you in the remaining time we have left. At the beginning, you talked about masking. How can you help people feel comfortable not masking at work, even if it's just a little bit? Any thoughts there as managers? Daryl, we'll go for you
You know,
first. What do you think about
for
that?
me, all right. Yeah, for me, the open conversation is what opened the door. Even small stories of struggle. It doesn't have to be some diagnosed issue, but everybody struggles. We have difficult times in our lives, and just being open with it, being authentic human beings, um, and then if others have moments of vulnerability and sharing, honoring that, respecting that, listening carefully, and certainly not penalizing individuals for that. I think very important signals. People are looking for, how do you use my data point, Christy? How do you use it? And then I feel better next time if I know you used it with love and respect.
I think self-awareness is so important as a manager. I'm an extrovert, so I can't assume that everyone else is going to want to do a presentation and then want to go out to happy hour or dinner afterwards. Like knowing your employees, knowing what makes them tick. Maybe they don't want public recognition. Maybe they want private recognition. Maybe when they do a big presentation, they need the next day off so they don't call in sick just to kind of recover. So I think it takes a while. I think you have to build that trust with folks. But I remember working with a super introverted data scientist, and I said, how will I know when you're stressed? Right. And then he told me, right. So then I could pick up on that and then help him. But I can't, if I don't know that, if I don't know what makes him stressed or how he needs to take a break. So I do think that the frontline managers are critical because they're the ones who are going to see those signals, to your point, Daryl, and then be able to make adjustments or support or bring in other folks when those signals start to go off.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much. We have another question here. Daryl, when you were sharing about your experiences, and then you asked Christy about how, and Christy, you mentioned that might be like a data point. If someone came to you with that they were struggling with mental challenges or mental illness or something like that, or anxiety or anything, and then that would be a data point. How can HR leaders coach managers to think of a data point like that as a non-negative? And I think we're doing better like that. We like both of you discussed, but what about say maybe a leader that doesn't feel that way or is of a different generation where they might look at a data point like that as a negative? How can you coach people like that to think positively of it?
I think education is really important. There's good peer training and leadership training around how to be an effective ally at work,
Mm,
and how to read those data points effectively. And investment in that kind of training and development is as important as technical skills and other types of training for leadership. Everybody needs the ability to reset the way they think on a regular basis. It should change, it should be fresh, it should be constant. We learn so much all the time. And the ability to have training, it includes, you're not a therapist unless you are, right? So don't try to be a therapist, but here's how you listen, and here's how you react, and here's how you build an organization of trust, and how you use data points effectively. I don't think it works to leave it to people's own contexts and their own experience. I think it has to be very intentional.
And I would just say, use your own benefits. If you have if you can talk about your counseling EAP program, if you're doing the well-being activities, if you're taking advantage of the backup care programs, then you as a leader are showing, not telling, what's expected in the workforce.
Love that. Thank you so much. Thank you again for your expertise. And we'll give it back to Rhonda here to close us out. Thank you again, Daryl and Christy. Really appreciate it.